she's sharing her presentation in the background, and she is going to call in. So we're waiting for her to email her presentation and for her to show up on the phone, and then one of us in the background will run her presentation. But in the meantime, I can do the housekeeping bit. So welcome everybody to Uncovering the Clues to Your Old House's History. Our speaker is Sally Zimmerman. We are very excited at the JP Historical Society that we got a Bridge Street Fund grant from Mass Humanities to fund this program and several others. We really appreciate their support. And while we have you here, we are going to take a little time to tell you about upcoming Jamaica Plain Historical Society events. So we have a few events coming up in April. The very first one is a book talk. It's an author called Wayne Miller, and he wrote a book called Burn, Boston, Burn, which is about arson sprees in Boston in the 1970s and 1980s, including some fires that took place in Jamaica Plain. We're co-hosting that with the Connolly branch of the Jamaica Plain branch, the Boston Public Library, and that will be both in person. So there are a few seats that you can actually go and sit in the library, or if you want to, you can register for Zoom online at our website, which is jphs.org/events. The other thing that we have in April is that we're a co-sponsor of a lecture series called Confronting Racial Injustice. This is a series that's been put on for a couple of years now by the Northeastern University School of Law. Their criminal justice task force there puts it on along with the Mass Historical Society. And this year their theme is Asian American racial injustice. And so the first talk is, as you see there, on Thursday, April 28th at 6 p.m. And it will be on the story of Parcel C, which is a piece of land in Boston's Chinatown, and the struggle for how that was redeveloped. And then the second lecture in the series is, or panel really, is on Thursday, May 26th. It's called Rising Asian American Political Power. It's a very high-powered panel of Asian American politicians, including Boston's new mayor, Michelle Wu. So that should be a really interesting one. And we hope that you will sign up for those. The sign up for those, they're all Zoom, is at Mass Historical Society's website, masshist.org/events. And then I'm pleased to say that we will be starting up our historical walking tours. We do free tours every week from mid-May to early October, and it's our 27th season. We're just nailing down the dates on those, but we should have the schedule out quite soon. And the way for you to find out about that schedule is to sign up for our monthly newsletter. So if you go to our website, jphs.org, you will be able to find out all the things that are going on, all these event details, the web links, and everything else. You can also follow us on social media if you prefer that method of getting your news and information. We're on Facebook, Insta, and Twitter. Of course, we would love for you to become a JP Historical Society member. I keep doing that. Members are our main source of support at the JP Historical Society. We're a small, local, all-volunteer organization. So members providing those membership fees are a way for us to do the things that we do. And then one of the things that's up on our website, brand new, just up a couple days ago, is a new house history. It's about 30 Carolina Avenue and 52 South Street, written by Jenny Nathans, who's on our executive committee and has written quite a few of these. And in fact, when we were thinking about what talks we should have this year, one of the things that we consistently hear from people ask questions about how do they research the history of their house. And we have some things up on our website which are helpful, but Jenny brought up the fact that Sally does a great workshop. And while we had originally thought we might do that in person, and we could still do it sometime in the future, we decided this Zoom presentation would be a great way to do that. So we'll put the link that's up on the web screen here for Jenny's newest house history into the chat so that you can read it, or you can just go to our website. It's on the front page in the latest articles section. But our hope is that you'll be inspired by reading that article and what you hear today to write your own house history and share it with us, because the goal of our organization is to promote and highlight the rich history of Jamaica Plain. So the more house histories we have for people to read and use in the future, the better. So the last piece of housekeeping is that at the bottom of your screen, there should be a question and answer section button, and you can use that. It says Q&A to submit questions for Sally. And then at the very end of the talk, she's going to take those questions. I'll come back on and I'll try and facilitate a question and answer session for her. And I'm going to just take a pause and check the chat to make sure we're in good shape to be able to give the presentation. I think Sally is here. Sally, I'm just making sure.
Yes.
You're here? Okay,
yep,
I'm going to introduce you then.
Okay.
Sally Zimmerman is a frequent speaker on old house preservation issues. She's an architectural historian and a preservation planner. Fairly recently, really retired, except she's still doing talks, so thank goodness for that. She's had a really varied career where she's helped homeowners with historic paint color selection. She's worked on energy conservation options for old houses, providing best practice preservation support for people in Boston, but also really the whole New England region. She holds a BA from Mount Holyoke College and a MA in Preservation Studies from Boston University. From a personal perspective, I can tell you, I attended a talk that she gave on 3 deckers at a Dorchester branch library that sort of totally refocused the way I think about that type of housing. And I also have had the great pleasure in the before times of working with Sally on the house committee at the Loring Greeno House, our beautiful 1760 Georgia mansion here in Jamaica Plain. So she is a JP resident, and I believe a lot of what you'll see in today's talk will be pieces of pictures of Jamaica Plain houses. So I am going to stop share my screen and turn it over to Sally, and hopefully we'll have a presentation from her that we can then start showing to you. So take it away, Sally.
Okay, so we're having some really ridiculous connection problems for which I apologize, but I think I can roll with it. And as long as Gretchen can open my PowerPoint presentation, I'll talk about the title. I'll say what I was going to say on the title slide while she's doing that. And Gretchen, if you can let me know when the title slide is open, then I will cue you when I need a new slide. So thank you. Gretchen's explained who I am in preservation, and I've been working for 40 years or so in this field, and I really love it because it provides the kind of history that I'm interested in, which is the kind that connects people to the past and the people who lived in the past and not just the famous ones. One of the things that I love about architectural history that I've done for so long is the fact that you deal with buildings, and those buildings are created by people, and connecting to those people is very meaningful to me. And I hope that that is some of what you will get from me this afternoon.
The title slide is showing. It's up.
Great.
We're ready to go.
Great. Well, we're going to uncover the clues, and if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. You should be seeing a nice sunny day on Center Street with a very old house. This is 480 Center Street, and it is a house that's probably been standing right there since about 1820. Doesn't really look like it, but if you tap, Gretchen, I think if you animate the slide and tap it, hopefully you get the 1939 black and white photo of the Ralph Young house taken from Digital Commonwealth. That shows you what it was like before the siding went on and when Center Street looked a little different from what it does now. This is a very typical kind of house that was all over Eastern Massachusetts. It's kind of the best house you could get in 1820 without having a mansion. It had 4 rooms in the main house and a little L at the back that would have had the kitchen, and that's still there too. But these chimneys that are, you see the tall ones sticking up, those are a pair of chimneys on the back wall that had a great innovation, which was being able to heat all 4 rooms in the main house. So a nice house, a good quality house of 1820, and it's still there. Next slide. One of the things that I think is most valuable about knowing the history of your house is what it can do to help inform you when you need to make a repair, or when you're thinking about a change that you want to make or you might need to make. This will, by understanding your house better, you'll be able to work with it in a better way, and build not just a better house for yourself, but something that carries on and can be part of the community and the neighborhood, and shape the future just as the house you inherited, or not literally maybe, but which you're living in now has shaped the place that you're living in. So that's one of the goals of this discussion. Now, next slide. We will be looking at 4 major sources and tools to find out more about the house. If you click on the first one, we'll go first to MACRIS. That is the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. That is a site, a database run by the Massachusetts Historical Commission that provides documentation on hundreds, thousands of buildings, sites, properties across Massachusetts. That's all been digitized and is now accessible, and that's I'll walk you through using MACRIS as your starting point. Next click. The next piece of my talk is looking at how to use historic map data and other archival collections to get the context to see into the past about your house and its surroundings. Next click. Then I'm going to suggest that you get out and walk around in your neighborhood, and that'll provide additional context, not just for sort of the historical past, but for the time that's happened, the time that's elapsed since your neighborhood was built out, give you a context for how houses have evolved over time. Next click. And then the last piece, I'm going to sort of go through little approaches that might come closer to a preservation type of repair when you are considering making a change. Next slide. Like I say, you always want to start with MACRIS. That's just, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, and it's very likely that there is some information. It's very hopeful that there is some information on your house. So this is my building on Beaufort Road in Jamaica Plain. It's a big 66-unit brick apartment building. And if I were going to research this on MACRIS, and I will go through each of these steps with you on the subsequent slides, first I'd open mhc-macris.net. I would click on MACRIS Maps. I would fill in the address search on the map file, click on the street view, click on the blue dot that indicates your location on a map, and under the details, click on the alphanumeric ID code that'll bring you to the actual inventory form that was documented and written out and has now been scanned and digitized. So now we're going to start into this whole series of 6. Next slide. When you click on MACRIS Maps, first thing you'll see is Bill Galvin up in the corner. He is the Secretary of the Commonwealth, but he's also the chairman of the Massachusetts Historical Commission. This is the head slide for MACRIS. Then if you do a animation, you'll get an arrow that shows you MACRIS Maps. You want to click on MACRIS Maps, click, and a big view of the state of Massachusetts will show up with all the cities and towns. You want to fill in the address search box on the right, click, and put in your address, click on that, and a street view, a blue street view will open up at the bottom. You want to click on that, and you'll get a new slide. This street view map opens with a black pin where your location is. And you can see there's a number of other dots around you. There's blue dots, there's red dots, there's red shading. Those all indicate different types of designation. But if you click on your blue dot, which is going to come up with a click on that, and you'll get a red circle around your blue dot, and then you click on your blue dots, and that brings you to a detail page. Click again on the blue dot, and you'll see there's a blue photo alphanumeric code. That is the piece of paper that was filled out for your property by some diligent historian some time ago, probably not all that recently. So if you do that, click please. This is what comes up, a statement in, a sort of table statement about your building, which mine is called the Ella C. Adams Apartment Building. There's the Boston identification number 10038. The name that was used originally was Lakeville Terraces. That's the other street on the other side of us. And you'll see if you click again, an arrow will come up pointing to a little blue box that says inventory. That's a PDF. If you click on the PDF, that will bring you to the scanned original. So that avoids you having to get on the 39 bus and going downtown to City Hall to pull a piece of paper out of a file cabinet at the Boston Landmarks Commission. I assume they still have all these paper files someplace. But they are all scanned and digitized. And if you actually read that file, which you can do digitally, it'll tell you things like, as we know, it's an Ella C. Adams was the developer of the building. It was built, gives you the date. It will tell you that it was constructed on the Thomas Severns estate. So there's more information on that file than there is in any of this digital stuff, which is good reason to have the scan. Okay, so now you're done. You've researched your building. You have all the information you need, and you can, go to bed happy. But you're not going to be satisfied with that. That's not enough. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to find out where you can dig further at the historic map data, looking at surroundings. Next slide. Okay, the site that I mostly use is historicmapworks.com, and that's circled at the bottom of the left side. It is a commercial site, so they're hoping that you will purchase a reproduction print of the map from them. I have done that sometimes, but mostly I just look at them. And this is the map for my area in 1890. It is the Insurance Atlas. This is the most amazing treasure trove of information about how communities grew up over time. The star is on the block that my building is located on, and you can see it says it's Thomas W. Severns estate. There's a building there underneath the star a little bit, and you can see much more information. The edge of Jamaica Pond. You can see that Ella Adams lives just north of my block, up on the upside. And Center Street is the road running down to the right of the star. And this extends, the neighborhood is what extends all the way over to Chestnut Avenue. So a lot of information, some houses there, some not. Property owners, boundary lines, even the configuration, the material of the buildings. The yellow is wood frame, the pink is brick or masonry. And this is how they told. If you were an insurance company in Chicago and you needed to write a policy on a building in Jamaica Plain, you needed to know what it looked like, and you didn't have any other way of finding that than these atlases. So they're very detailed and an incredible resource. Next slide. But you are really lucky because you're involved with the Jamaica Plain Historical Society, and they have a resource page on their website which includes all of the JP maps under historic maps. So you don't have to, dig around too much for that. You can go directly to them and just scroll through. Next slide. So this is my block in 1890. You can see a close-up there. There's Ella Adams's house out on Center Street. Then there's Thomas Severns's house below that. He has a brick house with a wood framed L, and the buildings that have the little X through them, those are carriage houses or outhouses. So or sheds, barns. He had a carriage house, presumably, because you can see he's got a little circular driveway coming in off of Center Street that drops him off in front of his house and then allows whoever takes care of the coach and the horses to bring them over to the barn on the upper side of the property. The big property, 119,000 square feet. That's helpful if you're doing deed research. So let's check and look. It's the one that's boxed in green. Let's check and see what is out there in my neighborhood that's left from that 1890s. So if you click, you'll see the photo comes up with my building on the bottom left-hand side. That's the brick end of the building. And you can see 3 posts in a row, 3 big granite posts in a row, and another granite post at a little farther location. And that is what's one of those, I don't know which one, but one of those is clearly associated with the black box that you see at the corner under the star by the Weber and Spalding properties. Now, if you click again, the other thing that's still here is a little yellow house there on the bottom, at the bottom right-hand corner, owned by Franklin Green. It's in a little Italianate house. It's still standing. And Franklin Green was no great shakes. He was an insurance salesman in Boston, which is, great. But the really cool thing about that house is that it was later owned by a really prominent sculptor, Bela Pratt, who lived there for quite a long time, and who is the sculptor who did the 2 wonderful statues in front of the BPL facing Copley Square, the ones that show arts and sciences. So, you find out, that's the one at the upper right-hand corner. You find out things about your neighborhood that tie you to the rest of the city in ways that are meaningful. So when you're in Copley Square, you can say, oh yeah, and Bela lived over there in JP. Next slide. Suppose I want to find out about Ella Adams. She, how many women were building 66-unit brick apartment buildings in 1905? Well, here is Ancestry's entry. Ancestry lists the census data. You can use other sources, but Ancestry is the one I'm most familiar with. And the highlighted section shows the Adams family on the ones that lived on Center Street. Charles H. Adams and Ella, his wife, their 4 children, and the 4 servants who took care of them. Katie, Mary, Kate, and Fred, the maid, cook, lady's maid, and coachman. But it also gives you a lot of other information. Were they able to read? Where were they born? Ireland. Where were they born? Massachusetts. How old are they? This gives you a really great sense of who's in the house with you. I mean, do you have servants in your house? Maybe you did. You wouldn't know unless you looked on the census. And you can see that Charles Adams is a wholesale grocer, and click again. You can find, here's a billhead from his company that is on the Historic New England collection. So it's just little bits and pieces of that. Maybe you want to print one of those out and put it in your kitchen if you own a house owned by Charles Adams, which is unfortunately no longer standing, but whatever. Okay, next slide. Okay, this isn't my house, but it's a block away from my house. And when I walk over here, I see these gorgeous 2 houses at 55 and 61 Lockstead Avenue. And I've wondered, well, who lived here? These houses face each other across a driveway. They share a garage. They're very nice. So maybe they were designed by an architect. So if we click, you will see what Macris can tell you, which is that, in fact, it was owned by siblings, Bertha and Minna Ramsire and Charles and Henrietta Ramsire. They were, obviously, they were brother and sisters. And the architect is Bowditch and Stratton, and the buildings were built by a JP builder, John P. Campbell, in 1907. So that's wonderful to know. That's why they are facing each other, because they literally have a family relationship. And they undoubtedly shared the garage. I'm not sure who owns the garage now, which side, but the garage is still there. Okay, that's lovely to know. Macros has filled you in that far, but can you find out more? Next slide. One source that I always check when I want to know more about people is Google Books. Google Books is part of the whole Google search engine and is a compilation of old bibliographical, genealogical, historical sources that are now out of copyright and can be scanned and put online. So in this case, I entered the name of the patriarch of the family, Frederick Ramsire, and the full location, Boston, Massachusetts, because these books don't know anything. They're too old to know about postal codes like MA. That would bring you somebody's Master's of Arts. Frederick Ramsire, and it shows an Appleton Encyclopedia entry from 1924, which you see there circled on the right, talking about how Frederick Ramsire came from Switzerland in 1844, came to Boston from New York City, and began a very, very successful tailoring business. Next slide. I always check Google as well, because you never know what people have posted on Google. And this time I hit a gold mine. This is a posting by one of the Ramsire's descendants, specifically looking at the lives of Bertha and Minna Ramsire. It's got photos of the house as they were originally built. They don't look like that now. Those two big photos on the bottom, and then on the lower right, you can see there's a photo with, I think, what is the beech tree that's currently there in front of the house, relatively newly planted. And the Ramsire sisters were fairly exceptional, and they frequently returned to Switzerland to go mountain climbing. So here you see that's Minna Ramsire with her mountain climbing ropes robustly standing in the center of the photograph, and her sister Bertha off to the left with the kind of big hat, in not the far left, but the right next to Minna. So this is, remarkable. There's even a recipe for a cake that Bertha used to make. So, if you live there, you can make Bertha's cake and in Bertha's kitchen, which is pretty unusual. Okay, next slide. I'm on to my third big topic, which is getting outside and getting out of the historical past and looking at the present. Next slide. You want to turn off the computer, go for a walk, look around your neighborhood for context. Keeping an eye out for houses that have not had updates gives you a good sense of what hasn't been changed or might have been changed on your own house. Next slide. These are two houses at the end of, in a early 20th century subdivision on Parkwood Terrace, right at the corner of the Jamaica Way. And whenever I'm stopped at the stoplight there, I see this one house on the left, and I think, wow, that is a really nifty house. I really like it. So I thought, I'm going to look into that, because I could see right around the corner that there was another house like it, but not quite the same. These were built identically. Both of them have had vinyl replacement windows put into them, but other than that, they're still there. The one on the left is very much in its original condition. You can see there's columns on the front porch, even though it has a enclosure behind them. And then if you click again, you'll see there are other paired columns at the top in the dormer facing Jamaica Way. These are kind of unusual treatments for a little house like this. If you look next door on the right, you can see that these things are gone. This is a perfectly fine renovation of a 1920s house, but it's done in a sort of standard builder way, kind of Home Depot style renovation. If I were taking a preservation approach to renovating these two houses, I would work as much as I could to replicate or preserve the features on the left-hand one, because they're so unusual. and they're so distinctive. So that, I think this is what you're hoping for, is to be able to say, do I have something that's really great and I want to maintain? Next slide. Now, looking at changes that happen to old buildings, probably the most significant one for the 20th century is siding, artificial siding. Here are two different three-deckers, one on Spring Park Avenue and one an architectural drawing for a house on Boylston Street that might have been built, I think it was, but I couldn't locate it in the putting this together. It's part of the Jacob Louis-Pold collection at Historic New England. He was a German-American architect, lived and worked in Jamaica Plain, West Roxbury, Dorchester, very prolific. And this drawing shows you the kind of elements that would have been part of these houses, these three-deckers originally. As late 19th and early 20th century buildings aged, their decorative detailing suffered. Much of it was lost. In the meantime, labor costs for things like painting were going up, and also carpentry to repair lost details. All that was rising. Artificial siding came along that promised that you wouldn't have to paint any longer. Asphalt, asbestos, aluminum, vinyl, and houses like three-deckers, buildings like three-deckers were particularly vulnerable because they're so difficult they're so big, they're so tall, they're so close to other buildings. They're actually the ones that would really have, really have taken siding maybe even more than any other type of homes. But you can see from the drawing what they might have had originally. Okay, next slide. Now we're on Kingsborough Terrace on the left and Spring Park Avenue on the right. This big White House corner of Kingsborough, it was, I'm guessing, shingle style originally. The shingle style is a architectural style of the 1880s that relies very heavily on the use of dark brown wood shingles to kind of wrap the entire house. It's not looking for parts of the house to stick out. It's kind of looking for parts of the house to be hugged in by these brown shingles. And you can kind of see that in the fact that in the circle, there's a very shallow gable at the back of the house and a kind of dormer that's pulled back from the edge of the roof. These are sort of things that would have been much less, would have been wrapped into that brown shingled exterior. And that would be a spectacular house to see if the siding ever came off of it, because I'm suspecting it's architect designed, nice big old house. Got a great entryway there on the bottom left-hand corner, beautiful house. So that's a possibility for somebody sometime, but you don't have to go, you don't have to go all the way on a big giant building like that. The one on Spring Park, the owners have just taken the siding off of the front of the house where you see the orange clapboards and shingles and left it on the side with the gray. That's great. Do that. Do it take the siding off every 5 years or 10 years or whatever, and sooner or later you'll have the whole thing done and it will really look fabulous. It's a huge gift. Next slide. Kingsborough Terrace, farther down from the big shingle style, now white house, is just an entire subdivision of craftsman style 2-family houses. And this is a great place. If you've got a house of this era, I suggest you take a walk down Kingsborough Terrace and look at all the porches, because they have had every kind of modification, enclosure, not enclosure, screens, part of the whole house. That's the kind of thing you wanna really pay attention to if you have a house like that and are thinking about enclosing the porch or opening the porch. Next slide. Gutters. Okay, gutters are not a wonderful thing to think about. They seem very boring and pedestrian. But in fact, they're pretty important, and climate change is forcing us to reconsider what we've been doing with gutters. If you click on this slide, a circle will open up on the Italianate house on the left-hand side, which is kind of a typical hot mess of what you find at the corner of many buildings. This is a modern aluminum gutter that's been hung off of the house as well as it could be, but it's not what was there originally. Let's say that. If you click again on another circle will open up on these Craftsman exposed rafter tail roof edge, and you can see that there's a miter where the gutter is coming around the corner of the building. And that's basically what used to be on the Italianate house or something like it. That molding that is in blue that goes up to the right behind the wires on the Italianate house, the red one, used to continue along that front. That house was not built with a fascia like you see in the home building drawing at the bottom right-hand side. You can click on that. This is the way that wood gutters were typically put onto houses, on the front of a fascia. But in the case of this Italianate house, it probably had a very simple gutter that might have just been a board on the roof. Anyway, working with gutters is going to be a tricky thing. And what we are now beginning to see, if you click again, the upper right-hand corner, that's a fiberglass gutter. It is mitered. It can take the same dimensions and profile of a historic wood gutter. It holds much more because the entire interior of that gutter is available for the water to flow through it. So fiberglass gutters are expensive, more expensive than even wood gutters, which are much more expensive than aluminum gutters. But it may be that if you're doing a big roofing job, you might want to consider putting a fiberglass gutter on that will replicate and take care of some of this mess that you find on the poor little Italianate one. Next slide. Additions, such as these rooftop additions, if you click again, you'll see what I'm talking about. If you're contemplating anything major like this, you're really going to need design assistance. And that's basically all I can say in a talk of this length, because there are many, many, many design questions that come up from trying to make additions. But I would say hire an architect as soon as you can. Next slide. We're at my last piece, so hold your questions and we'll get to those in a moment as well. This is about preservation approaches and looking at historic character and recapturing it. Next slide. What I'm going to do, I want to say first off, before I even start talking about this, that the slides coming up are just ones that I took walking around. When I do talks like this, people worry that somehow their house is not, you know, they're like the fashion don't, and that's not what this is about. Nothing that I'm going to show means that your house is wrong or you've done something terrible. I don't want anybody to feel singled out when I make these observations. They're just areas where you might think about doing something different, not a requirement and not a judgment. Okay, so the sources that I turn to most for information about how to do preservation on an old house are three. Primarily, maintaining your old house in Cambridge. This is a really great, simple guidebook for homeowners about repairs to old houses, and it's available at the Cambridge Historical Commission, which is the equivalent of the Boston Landmarks Commission, but in Cambridge. So if you go to www.cambridgema.gov and the publication section, you can find this and get a copy of it. And if you are planning anything like a new porch or a new fence or anything like that, I would seriously consider getting a hold of it. If you really want to know much more about how old buildings work, read the property care white papers that are online at historicnewengland.org. These are very detailed expert explanations on specialty finishes in an old house, like a wood roof, wood shingle roof. And then Boston Building Resources is a great local resource, and they're now opening up to workshops again. I've just gotten an email about that, so definitely look at Boston Building Resources workshops for help on taking care of your old house. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to start with paint because to my mind, it's the one thing that more than, well, it's the one thing you're going to have to deal with sooner or later on your house. You can ignore a lot of other things on your house, but eventually you're going to have to paint it. And to me, it's the most direct way to achieve a preservation approach on your building. This is a Green Street, big Greek Revival house, double house on Green Street, probably 1840, something like that. These are not museum reproduction colors. They don't have to be museum reproduction colors. I think in a lot of ways, more important than that is the placement of the paint color on the house and understanding what was the historic standard for using color on a house, for painting a house. They always used in the 19th century 3 paint colors, or nearly always. You don't have to worry about the exceptions. The body color, which is the siding color in this case is the red. The trim color, which is the remaining woodwork on the house, and that's in the cream color on the Greek Revival one. And then a third color, which was always used on the window sashes, the doors, and if there were shutters, used on the shutters. That 3-color standard, siding color, trim color, and sash and door color, is universal enough that if you use that kind of approach, your house is going to have a kind of settled historic appearance. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner a brick house where the siding is brick, but nonetheless, it's a color. And then all of the woodwork is in the cream color, and then the window sashes are sort of a bronze brown, and the door is a nice accenting red. So this is the way that you can achieve a historic look without actually doing any like significant preservation, just through the choices of color that you put on your house and where you put them. Next slide. So paint color is a great tool, as I said in the last slide. It's the main reason that you would consider using period type paint colors and period type paint placement is because it makes it much easier to see the architecture of the building. It just settles the building down and becomes evident to the passerby what's going on in terms of the design. Now on the 3 houses here, they missed the mark at some level. Not a problem. It's pure choice. What you like is what you like. But if you do want to do it in a sort of preservation way, the house on the left with the white, there's great architectural detail on that building that has been there since the 1870s, 80s when this building was built, and it just is kind of lost in the overall white color. So it's not wrong. It's just a missed opportunity. The orange and chartreuse one in the upper right-hand corner is not in JP, and it's clearly a choice, but it sort of makes the house silly, or it diminishes the house I think in some ways it devalues it. When I see it, it just looks kind of like it's a silly house. And then below that, in the lower right-hand corner, is a really great double Italianate house on Green Street, and it's a wonderful house. It's got great surviving detail. It's just a little pale, and it's sort of washed out, which is not terrible. It's a big house. It sits way up high. It's on a major street. It's a big house. It has great architecture, and just a little more sort of emphasis in the colors would help a lot. And that's, again, my opinion. Next. Okay, here's some these things would involve a little more comprehensive solutions. These are 2 neighboring houses. One of them has a porch, one of them doesn't. If you click this on the right, the porch is still there. On the left, You can see over to the left that there was a concrete porch that was poured. And you also see that there's two very prominent basement windows looking at you, and also a kind of rough, kind of messy, not totally finished off stone foundation. This often happens to houses. They often lose their porches because porches pull away. Porches are fussy, they deteriorate, the fun stuff falls off of them and it's hard to put it back. So you just take it off and pour a replacement like this one. So, but it's a lost opportunity. I think you know, it tells you something's not there. Next. Another thing about these two is that there are white windows on the one on the left and black sash on the one on the right. In this period, most window sashes were painted dark. We have mostly white vinyl replacement windows because vinyl can't absorb heat. It has to be light colored in order for the window to remain intact. If it were a black, dark plastic, it would heat up in the sun and warp or distort. Again, this would be a huge investment by the owner, but it's now possible if you have failing white vinyl replacement windows, it's now possible to get a dark replacement window in fiberglass. Again, more expensive, but possible. So a big investment would be maybe to replace all the white vinyl windows with black fiberglass windows. That would add a great deal of character to the and definition to the building. And then finally, next slide. The gutter and the downspout, are these really important parts of the trim? They're important parts of the drainage system, but accenting them in red is maybe like distracting. At least it is to me. And on the house on the right, you see the trim is painted uniformly. There's no other color pulled out. So these are just ideas about things that could be done on a building like this if there came to be a reason to do that. It's not fine as it is, but it's an opportunity. Next slide. Another porch issue that frequently comes up is code compliance. Porch railings now have to be 42 inches high, and they have to have spacing of 4 inches. So if your porch railing gets replaced, you need to do it according to code. And these are 3 examples of what poses a problem when that happens. You can see on the bottom right, those are original porch posts with, I think, what's a new railing, fairly new railing. And then above that, on the upper right, you see porch posts that were probably reworked with a longer square section at the bottom. And you could put a second kind of supplementary rail on the flat part of that porch post and bring it to 42 inches. Hasn't been done, and then you see a kind of creative approach on the far left, where a whole double set of turned posts has been put in. This is one where you've got to kind of, I don't know, talk to somebody creative about how to do that in a way which deals with the original material. Finally, my last slide. These are little things. These are not things to worry a lot about. If you have shutters on your house, maybe they should be the same size as the windows that they go over. This is a great Italianate house on the left. It's sided, but it still has great detail. And maybe it's well enough just to take the little shutters off and not worry about them. On the lower right, if you have a great 2-car garage in your backyard, try to keep those wooden garage doors going as long as possible. They take a beating, but they're incredibly expensive to replace in anything that looks anything like that. And then on the porch, I think the thing I always got questions about most was how do I paint my porch? So luckily here's one that is in the process of being repaired. Everything that you see on that porch on the upper right that's white, that will ultimately get painted in that dark cream color that you see on the main house behind there. The newels, the porch columns, the framing under the porch, and the risers of the porch steps, everything that's white, that will get painted cream. You can paint the lattice, which is great lattice, right dimension, right proportion of lattice, not the stuff you get from the Home Depot already stapled together. If that's done in a dark green, like Benjamin Moore Essex green, something like that, it looks great with foundation plantings against it. And then finally, the gray porch stair treads, those are stained or primed in gray in the image, and best to keep with a gray, but use a stain instead of a paint. The stain is less slippery. You'll have to renew it, and it'll be easier to renew in stain than it is in paint. So that's how you do porch painting. Just happened to see one of those when we were going around taking pictures. That's basically it. I don't know whether, I think, yes, if you go to the next slide, that's my last slide. I hope that you will pull together information on your house from Macris, that you will follow up with other historical sources and maps. Take a look out on the street for something that is similar to yours for ideas, and then look at some of these preservation approaches as you're contemplating any repairs or touch-ups to your house. And with all that in mind, I think you will have a new appreciation for the history and character of your old house. And next slide. Thank you. I'm happy to take your questions.
All right, I am coming back on. This is going to be interesting. Sally is a disembodied voice, but we will do our best to have an interchange. So there are lots of questions. Let me see.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I'm going to actually ask you a question that came into the JP Historic as a prerogative of the Q&A person. Somebody wrote in, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, and they had their grandparents had a house on Spring Park Ave, which actually I think you showed at one point in the presentation. And the family lore was that at some point before her grandparents lived there, it had served as a funeral home. And it was the Mann family, who are now part of Mann and Rogers over on South Huntington. And she wanted to figure out a way to figure out how to research not just the house, it's the usages of the house. Is there a way to do that?
Yes. There are city directories, which are the old-fashioned equivalent of phone books. And collections, does JPHS have any of that online? Boston Athenaeum has a lot of them online.
Yeah, we usually send people to Tufts because they have the complete
Yep.
set.
And Tufts has a huge collection as well. Yep, I would look. The good part about the early 20th, and most funeral homes are, sort of a late 19th century, early 20th century thing that happens to big old buildings. There are what are called reverse directories, and that allows you to look a property up by its street address and see it's not just you have to know the name of the person who lived in the building. You can go at the back, there's a listing of addresses by street. You turn to that address and you'll see what it says about what's happening there. And it may very well be on a historic atlas as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think that woman could not attend, but we are recording the session and we will post it on the website as soon as we can, so people can hopefully come back and revisit the great tips that Sally gave, and we'll also put the handouts up there as well. So, okay, on to the next question. Somebody says, their house was a barn. Can it be researched similarly? Similarly, that's the word I'm looking for. Sorry, Sally.
Yes, it could have been relocated on the lot, but yes, you should be able to look at the historic insurance maps and see whether something of a similar footprint shows up basically in your location, and it has a little X on the roof, which will tell you that it's an outbuilding. Very possible. You'll certainly find, you should be able to look at the atlas and find out whose property it originally was on. It was probably subdivided, but if you use the JPHS site, you can kind of either go forward or backward on the maps and see how things begin to become more dense as you get farther into the 20th century. And that's when you'll locate. You might find a building permit for it, but I think before I started looking for a building permit for it, I would look to see how far back you can get with that address, with that location, and do it like that.
Sounds good. There are a couple questions here about Macris. So somebody says that there seems to be a lack of information about houses between South Street and the Arboretum in Macris. Do you know why that would be the case? Why Macris would have a lack of information about a certain area?
Yes, it's because not everything has been documented at the same level. So if you can't find anything on Macris, then I think you're working off of the historical atlases, and that is the best place to start. You will get, I mean, the thing with the atlases, when the subdivision of lots gets much more dense, it's a little harder to see the names because they're writing them on littler and littler pieces of property. So sometimes it can be a little questionable, and they don't always get the property owner's name exactly right. You know, it could be O'Donnell, but it's O'Connell. So you need to do a little bit of creative thinking around that. But you should still be able to see, in general, the subdivision of the property, and that will certainly tell you more about the history of that neighborhood. There is considerable interest in expanding and filling the gaps in the survey for Boston, and I suspect in the next 2 to 5 years, a lot more of that will be done. But there's no reason why you still can't do that on your own. You don't have to use Macris for everything.
Okay, and then another Macris question: is there equivalent to Macris in neighboring states, such as New Hampshire?
You know what? You are really lucky to live in Massachusetts, because no, the equivalent effort has been made, but nowhere else in New England has it been digitized. So for those questions, looking from New Hampshire, looking from Rhode Island, they've been very well documented. They have exactly the same sorts of documentation, but they don't have a digital interface. So you need to probably contact the State Historic Preservation Office or the city in which your property is located, and find either the preservation officer, the zoning person, whatever. But that information does exist. It's just it's much less accessible and much less easily accessed in other New England or any other state that I know of. So we really have a remarkable GIS capacity for preservation in Massachusetts, which is one thing that makes it easier to do this kind of work.
Cool. Somebody gets an error message on Macris. Is there a way they click on the black flag on their property and they get a pop-up box that says the resources are invalid? Tool search location, does that just mean going to the people that create Macris and asking them what the heck is going on?
Well, try. You may not have a blue dot. The black pin isn't sufficient. The black pin just gives you the GIS location. It's like saying, oh yeah, that's where it is. There's definitely a place at that black pin. That's not, the middle of the ocean. But if there's no blue dot or blue shaded area near it, then there's no inventory form. So then you're back as we say, back to the historical insurance atlases for deciphering what's going on. So it's unfortunate that, yeah, there isn't a MACRIS form for everything, but if you get that error message, it may be just that there is no form for that property.
Okay. So people are asking about City of Boston resources that the city has the Cirrus tool to look up.
Yeah.
And then also the city archives. Are those places that people could look as well?
They can. Yes. My particular building has a very long entry because there's so many units and there's been a lot of building permit history. So definitely that will show you what kinds of, that's excellent. That's an excellent suggestion. That will definitely show you where changes have been made to your building. A lot of changes get made without a building permit, but absolutely check the building permit history. And then the city archives, it's unlikely to have much information unless you have a building for which an extensive set of plans would have been submitted. So yeah, the city archives does have plans on file. It tends to be more prominent buildings, more public buildings, churches, things that were designed by an architect. So more standard buildings are not likely to show up in the plan files at the city archives, but there are, that is a possibility, but less likely the more modest your building is. I hope that answers the question.
We will hope so, but if people have further clarifications for the questions, you can always email in and I will pass things on to Sally if we need further information. And somebody did put in the chat, I think, about sending in questions to the Historical Society. We can do some research for you, or everything is on our website. So our first suggestion is always to use the little magnifying glass on our website to search and see if you can find the answer to your question. There's thousands of things up there, but we can't really do research on houses, which is why we're offering this program so people can do their own research, and we'll try and help where we can. So Sally, a question that somebody asked is, what's the full term for reverse directories?
Oh, the full term for reverse directories.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, that's just what I think of them as. They're directory by street address rather than by name. I'm old enough that I remember having one of these in our house when I was growing up for the town that I grew up in. I didn't know what it was, but it was a big orange book. It wasn't a phone directory. They're commercial directories that were done for businesses, and they started in Boston about 1840. And so they go way back. And that information is also on Ancestry. So if you get an owner name from the insurance map, you can then begin to research that owner, and city directory entries for that person will show up. Those records have been incorporated in the Ancestry files as well. So you can find them by person. That isn't the reverse directory. Sorry, I can't show you one. I don't have one in my possession, but they were the marketing tool of the early 20th century. It was how you figured out if somebody might be interested in your services. So you could send a flyer on your new dry cleaning store to people within your neighborhood, and it was just a way of gathering marketing information. So it's now all, I'm sure there's I'm sure it's vast, much larger than those books used to be, but you can also get city directory information off of Ancestry.com as well.
I just muted myself and unmuted myself. There's somebody who's asking about census information for people who lived in the house. Is there any place to do that other than Ancestry.com? I think some of the older censuses are actually available free from the feds, maybe?
You can go, I mean, you can actually physically go to, well, you used to be able to go to a regional archives. There was an outpost of the United States Census Archives in Waltham, but I don't think it exists anymore or not open. But other family tree, there are other search, genealogy search sites that, you know, basically you can sign up for a month for a free trial for most of them. And then there are some free ones that exist as well. But other than that, you used to have to go to Washington and pull up microforms, which was crazy. Or you had to write people in the Historical Society in any town your ancestor might have lived in, and try to find out information from them. But no, I don't know for sure if any of the big, probably maybe the BPL has.
Yes.
I'm sure if you go to the BPL, you can access these databases from the library system.
Yes.
Without having
pointing
to.
out that Ancestry has a library edition that's free, and that's available through the BPL, as is
exactly.
many newspapers, and you can get a free 7-day trial to newspapers.com, which is really comprehensive if you want.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. Let's see. This is a bit off topic, but I think it's kind of an interesting question. So, do you know about histories for the source to learn about the evolution of plumbing and heating in New England houses?
Oh yeah, it's fascinating. I'll have to take my phone to another room. There are several books. I hope I don't lose anybody. There are several great books about plumbing, heating, bathrooms. I don't want to get the name wrong, so I'm going to my library. Okay, All the Modern Conveniences, American Household Plumbing, 1840 to 1890. Maureen Ogle, O-G-L-E, and The Comforts of Home, The American House and the Evolution of Modern Convenience by Merritt Irely, I-E-R-L-E-Y. Comforts of Home, Merritt Irely, and All the Modern Conveniences, American Household Plumbing. Those are two that you can look at.
Great. I just put those in the chat for the person who asked that question as well. Okay, I think we're running out of time, but let's see if I can find at least one. Somebody has a house that's relatively new, built in 1930, and it's not on his Macris or the historic map websites. I know that our maps on the JPHS go up to about 1924. Are there other sources for these new 100-year-old homes by any chance?
More likely they are in that you will be more likely to find a building permit for those. Whether you'll have plans is another question. But with the early 20th century, 1920s and 1930s houses, there are fairly good sort of guidebooks. For instance, the ones that deal with the pre-built, pre-cut Sears houses, and Aladdin was another company that made pre-cut houses that, that's not necessarily what this person has, but there are good guides from Dover publication on house plans of that period, so that you can see how they went together. And there's also a really great website. I haven't used it in a long, long time. Maybe Jenny knows it. A woman who runs it, restoration. I'll have to look it up but it's a compilation. Yeah, it's a compilation of archival images from advertising of houses of the 1920s, teens, 20s, and 30s. It's useful just for ideas about what they looked like. But Dover publication, the Sears houses of the 1920s, house plans of the 1920s, things like that. And Historic New England actually has, if you go to Historic New England's collections site, there is a fair amount of ephemera, advertising ephemera, and you look at, architecture 1920s, you'll be able to pull up a lot of that as well from the Historic New England collections site.
Great, cool. All right, I think we should call it a day, having been online for over an hour now. And I want to thank you, Sally, for a wonderful presentation. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but I think it actually worked out. That's amazing. Thank you behind the scenes to Charlie and Ariel, who are panelists and came up with the quick turnaround of the way we did that. So thank you, everybody. As noted, we are recording this. We'll get it edited and post it up on our website within the next few days, we hope, and we hope that we'll see you at other events, and you'll join our newsletter so you can hear more about what we do. And we appreciate that you appreciate historic houses in Jamaica Plain and elsewhere as well. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
And thank you, everyone, for being patient with this. I'm really sorry it was not possible to be personal about it. So,
thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.